We are going to the second vitiating factor that we have in law. The second vitiating factor, we have what we call misrepresentation. So misrepresentation also is defined under Section 2 of the Contracts Act of Uganda, and majorly this is a false statement of fact, or a false statement of material, a false statement of material fact that is stated or it is made during or before entering the contract, and later it is relied upon by the other party to enter into a contract. So realize that while we are making contracts, we go through the process of representations. So what are representations? So representations, this is where, or these are statements which are either written or spoken, but the statements you make to another party while inducing him to enter into a contract. For example, if I have a calculator which I intend to sell to someone, so if I'm to sell him and I say this is a calculator, that is a representation. I'm selling it at 15,000. That is a representation. Why? I'm trying to induce the other person to enter into a contract. Now, when that person comes into a contract, then we can enter into a contract, meaning that you can't enter a contract unless you make representations. However, while you are making representations, you should make sure that they are not misleading, you don't intend to fraud, they are not negligent. Are we together? So you have to make representations that are true. So now when you make representations that are not true, they later become misrepresentation. And now when they become misrepresentations, then they vitiate a contract. For example, if you say that I'm selling a calculator, but you know that what you're selling is not a calculator, then you are making a misrepresentation. Because the other person will buy this thinking it is a calculator, not knowing that it's not a calculator. But at the back of your mind, you, the person that was selling this project or this product, you well knew that you are not selling a calculator. So that will amount to what we call misrepresentation in simple terms. So we should know, where do we find misrepresentation in Uganda? We've already defined it according to Section 2 of the Contracts Act. Now, the other things that we have to know is that what is the effect of misrepresentation in Uganda? So the effect of misrepresentation in Uganda is in Section 16 of the Contracts Act, and basically a misrepresentation does not declare or make the contract void, but rather it makes the contract voidable. So a misrepresentation will make a contract voidable but not void. So we have to understand what are the elements of a misrepresentation. When do we say that there is a misrepresentation? So there must be elements of misrepresentation. So the elements are 4. So the first element to say that there was a misrepresentation is that it must be a false statement of fact. What is a false statement of material fact? What is a false statement of material fact? The statement is false, not true. Material fact, meaning that it is this statement that is pertinent to the contract, that without that statement, this person would not have entered into the contract. So the contract must be a false statement of material fact. Now the question is, what will amount to material fact? You're going to see that various cases have come in to interpret this aspect of false statement of material fact. For example, it should not be this statement that is alluding to the future. So you're going to see various cases that talks about the future. It is not with this statement that alludes to the future, that in future ABCD will be made. Why? Because you cannot tell the future. And you have seen various cases such as Edgington versus Fitzmaurice. For those that love reading cases, you have to read the case of Edgington versus Fitzmaurice, where it will clearly explain that a material statement of fact will not be this one that alludes to the future. Then the other criteria on determining whether it is a material statement of fact, it must be this statement that is not a mere trade path. We know a trade path. For example, if they tell you that if you take Guinness, you're going to become a lion. No, it doesn't mean that when you take Guinness, you will become a lion. If you don't become a lion, you should not sue and say, these people told me I'll become a lion. That is just a mere trade path. So when they told you a statement that is a mere trade path just to sell their products, you cannot come in and say it was a mere representation. Then it must not be this statement of opinion or a mere opinion. So what is a statement of opinion? A statement of opinion, this is where someone makes it without actual knowledge or without conclusive knowledge, but it is just based on its opinion. If you come and ask me, Stuart, where is Mbarara? And I tell you, I've never gone to Mbarara, but I usually see these people using this route. I think that is the route. It is just a mere opinion. Now, when you follow my opinion, you cannot come in and say that this statement, I relied on it, it was a false statement of fact. And you have to look at all those provisions. Then the other element of a misrepresentation, it must be made by a party or an agent to the contract. It must be made by the party to the contract, and that was clearly established and interpreted or explained in the case of Payman versus Lanjani. That clearly explained that the person who made the false statement must be one of the parties to the contract. Then it must be this one that is made before or during the contract. So the person who makes a false statement or a misrepresentation must be this one who made it before or during the contract. And we see the case of Roscola versus Thomas. For you who still remember the aspect of the horse which they wanted to purchase in your semester 1. So the case of Roscola versus Thomas goes ahead to explain that it must be this statement that is made before or during the contract. Then lastly, it must be this statement that induces the party to enter into the contract. So the statement, as we said, it is material. It must be this one that induced the other party to enter into the contract in order to contract. Then we have to understand the types of misrepresentation. We have 3 types of misrepresentations in law. The first type of misrepresentation is what we call fraudulent misrepresentation. And fraudulent misrepresentation was clearly explained in the case of Derry versus Peak. That case of Derry versus Peak brought out the ingredients or the elements of fraudulent misrepresentation. And these included: 1, you make a statement, a false statement of fact. You, the person who makes the statement, you make it knowing it is untrue. You make untrue statement of fact with an intention to defraud. You have that intention to defraud the other party. And then when you make it to that person, he relies on that statement, but your intention was to defraud. Then that will become fraudulent misrepresentation. Then the second type of misrepresentation is what we call negligent misrepresentation. Now, what is negligent misrepresentation? Negligent misrepresentation is not fraudulent misrepresentation. No, it is negligent. This is where someone who had a duty of care to make a statement makes it negligently or carelessly or recklessly, not with an intention to defraud, but makes it carelessly. This one usually arises to people who owe duties of care. For example, an advocate. If you go to an advocate, he has a duty of care to explain to you with diligently. So if he makes a statement that wouldn't have come from him, or if he says that he tells you like something that you did, or he doesn't advise you properly, among others. Or if you go to a doctor and you say, I'm sick, I'm feeling headache, he tells you, no, you are not feeling headache, we have to chop off your hand. All that is negligent misrepresentation. He has made the statement carelessly, though without the intention to defraud. Then lastly, it is innocent misrepresentation. Actually, with negligent misrepresentation, you have to read the case of Hadley-Bryan versus Heller Brothers Company. So you read the case of Hadley-Bryan versus Heller Brothers Company on negligent misrepresentation. Then the last type of misrepresentation is what we call innocent misrepresentation. So you're going to see that innocent misrepresentation does not affect the contract. Why? This is the statement, or this is a statement that a person made honestly, thinking that it was true, yet it was not true. So you make it honestly, thinking that it was true, yet in actual sense it was not true. And that has been seen in various cases. So thank you very much. That is what we call a misrepresentation in the laws of contract.